There's a certain feeling you get at a carnival, a weird mix of excitement and dread, like anything could happen, and none of it would be real. I hadn't been to one in years, not since I was a kid, but when that small traveling show came to town, I figured I'd give it a go, just for old time's sake. It was one of those late summer nights where the air felt thick, almost too warm to breathe, and the sun was sinking just past the horizon. The carnival was packed with families laughing, running, and dragging each other to the games and rides, but something about it felt off. Maybe it was the slightly crooked Ferris wheel or the way the lights flickered like they were on their last breath. The whole place had this atmosphere that clung to you like a damp sheet. The smell of stale popcorn and too sweet cotton candy filled the air, and underneath it all was this faint, sickly odor I couldn't quite place. I wandered around for a while, trying to enjoy myself. Played a few games, won a cheap stuffed animal that was already coming apart at the seams. But then I saw him, the clown. At first, he was just part of the background, one of those carnival performers they have walking around, juggling or making balloon animals for kids. But he wasn't like the others. His costume was old, faded, and the white face paint was cracked, flaking off around his eyes. And those eyes, they were black. Not just dark, but black, like two pits staring straight through me. He stood under one of the flickering lights near a game booth, watching me with this twisted grin that stretched too far across his face, like his skin was pulled too tight. I shook it off, kept walking. But when I looked back, he was still there, that grin never faltering, his head tilted just slightly, like he was waiting for something. I told myself it was just part of the act. That's what carnivals do, right? They get in your head, make you think everything's a little strange, a little off-kilter. But something about that clown didn't sit right with me. I should have left right then and there, but I stayed. I don't know why. Maybe it was the challenge of proving to myself that I wasn't scared. Or maybe it was something else, something I didn't want to admit. I wandered into the funhouse. You know the kind. Mirrors, tight corridors, creepy little animatronics that jump out at you when you least expect it. I figured it'd be good for a laugh. But as I stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. The air was colder in there, almost damp. My reflection in the mirrors was warped, grotesque, like I was seeing some twisted version of myself. But that's what those things are supposed to do, right? Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw him again. The clown. He was standing at the entrance, just watching. He hadn't followed me in, hadn't moved, just stood there, staring, that grotesque grin still plastered on his face. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was all part of the act, but every turn I took, every corner I rounded, there he was again, just outside the mirrors, always watching. By the time I made it out of the funhouse, I was on edge. I had this creeping sensation crawling up my spine like a cold finger tracing my vertebrae. But the clown was gone. I didn't see him anywhere. I scanned the crowd, but he had disappeared. I let out a breath I didn't even know I was holding. I left the carnival soon after, tried to laugh it off on the drive home. It was just some guy in makeup trying to freak people out. That's what they're paid to do. I even started to feel a little ridiculous for letting it get to me so much. But as I lay in bed that night, drifting off to sleep, I saw that grin again. Wide, too wide, and those black eyes staring straight into my soul. I jolted awake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. The room was pitch dark, save for the thin strip of moonlight seeping through the crack in the curtains. For a moment, I couldn't remember why I felt so on edge, why my body was buzzing with adrenaline. And then it hit me. Those eyes, that smile. I rubbed my hands over my face, trying to shake the image from my mind, but it clung to me like cobwebs. Just a nightmare, I told myself. I needed to sleep. But the unease lingered, sitting heavy in my chest like a stone. Eventually, I managed to drift off again, but the sleep was restless, full of fragmented dreams. Always the clown, always that grotesque grin. When I woke the next morning, I tried to laugh it off. It was just a bad dream, the leftover jitters from that weird carnival. I got ready for work, still feeling a little off, but determined to put it behind me. By the time I stepped outside, the cool morning air helped clear my head. The world felt normal again, stable, until I saw the balloon. It was tied to the fence in front of my house, a bright red balloon just floating there, bobbing slightly in the breeze. I stopped, staring at it for a moment. It could have been a prank. Some local kids messing around trying to spook the neighborhood. That's all it was. Still, unease prickled at the back of my mind. I untied the balloon, let it float up into the sky, and headed to work. But all day I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I started noticing things, little things, like how the streetlights outside my office flickered when I passed under them, or how the shadows seemed just a little too long, too dark. And then there were the balloons. I found one on my car during lunch, another at the entrance to my building when I got off work. They were always red, always just there, waiting. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence. There had to be some explanation, right? But by the time I got home that evening and saw yet another red balloon tied to the gate, my nerves were frayed. I stood there for a long time, just staring at it. It wasn't the balloon itself that scared me, but the fact that it kept showing up. Everywhere I went, there it was, like it was following me. But that was impossible. It had to be some stupid prank, right? I forced myself to walk up to the gate, untie the balloon, and pop it with a snap of my fingers. The latex hissed as it deflated, collapsing in on itself until it was just a sad red scrap of rubber on the ground. I told myself that was it, that I had taken control of the situation, that I wouldn't be bothered anymore. But that night, the dreams returned. They were worse this time. I was back at the carnival, wandering through the twisted corridors of the funhouse, but the walls were closing in, the mirrors distorting my reflection into something monstrous. Every time I turned a corner, the clown was there, closer this time, his grin wider, his black eyes gleaming with something dark and hungry. I tried to scream, but my voice was gone, swallowed by the endless laughter echoing through the funhouse. I woke up drenched in sweat again, my heart pounding like it was trying to break free from my chest. I couldn't catch my breath. It was just a dream, I told myself, just a nightmare. But when I glanced at the window, I saw it, the unmistakable shape of a red balloon tied to the outside of my window frame, bobbing gently in the wind. I bolted out of bed, threw open the window, and snatched the balloon off the frame. My hands were shaking as I popped it, but that didn't make me feel any better. How had it gotten there? There was no way anyone could have reached that window from the outside. I lived on the second floor. There was no balcony, no fire escape. I didn't sleep much after that. The balloons kept appearing. Every day without fail, there was a red balloon waiting for me somewhere. At first, it was outside, tied to my car, hanging from the fence, even floating lazily outside my office building. Then it started getting worse. I found one inside my house. It was sitting in the middle of my living room when I got home from work, like it had been waiting for me. That was when I started locking all the doors and windows, double-checking every night. I even installed a security camera by the front door. But the footage never showed anyone. The balloons just appeared. I watched hours of footage, replaying it over and over, hoping to catch something, anything that would explain how they were getting in. But every time, the same thing. Nothing. One minute the front porch was empty, and the next there was a balloon. I stopped trying to explain it after a while. How could I? There was no logic to it, no reason. I was being stalked by a goddamn balloon. It sounded ridiculous even in my own head, but it was happening. And the worst part was that I knew it wasn't just the balloons. I started seeing him again, the clown. At first it was just flashes, like out of the corner of my eye. I'd be walking down the street, and I'd catch a glimpse of that grotesque white face, grinning at me from across the road. But when I turned to look, he was gone. It kept happening. At the grocery store, at work, even when I was driving. I'd see him in the rearview mirror, sitting in the back seat of a car behind me, his black eyes locked on mine, that grin never faltering. But when I blinked, he was gone. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that I was making it all up, letting my paranoia get the best of me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The clown was real, and he was watching me, waiting. Things escalated after that. One night I came home to find a message written on my front door. The paint was smeared, dripping down the wood like blood. The words were jagged, scrawled in big, uneven letters. "You can't run." My blood ran cold. I stood there, staring at the message, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't just some harmless prank anymore. Someone, or something, was after me, and I had no idea why. I called the police. Of course, they didn't take me seriously. They came, looked at the door, took some photos, but all they could say was that it was probably just a vandal. Kids, maybe. "Let us know if anything else happens," they said, as if this was normal, as if I wasn't losing my mind. I scrubbed the paint off the door, but the words still burned in my mind. "You can't run." It felt like a promise, like the clown was telling me that no matter what I did, no matter how far I tried to go, he would find me. He would always find me. The next few weeks were a blur of anxiety and terror. I couldn't go anywhere without feeling like I was being watched. Every corner I turned, every room I walked into, I expected to see him standing there grinning at me with that too wide smile. The balloons kept coming, always red, always waiting for me in places they shouldn't be. And then, one night, I saw him up close. I was walking home from work, taking the long way because I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world's holding its breath. My footsteps echoed off the pavement, too loud in the stillness. I glanced over my shoulder, and that's when I saw him. The clown was standing in the middle of the street, about 50 feet behind me. His outfit was the same as before, faded, dirty, with patches of color worn down to dull grays and browns. His face was white, cracked and peeling, and his eyes, they were pitch black, like two bottomless pits. He wasn't smiling this time. His lips were twisted into something else, something darker. I froze. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. He took a step toward me, then another. The way he moved, it wasn't natural. It was slow, deliberate, like each step was part of some horrible game. I could hear the soft squeak of his shoes against the pavement, the faint rustle of his tattered costume. And then I heard it, a low, guttural chuckle. It started deep in his throat, barely audible at first, but it grew louder with each step, building into this twisted, manic laugh that echoed down the street. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I forced myself to move, to turn around and run, but no matter how fast I went, I could still hear that laugh getting closer and closer. I didn't stop running until I reached my apartment, slamming the door behind me and locking every lock. I stood there panting, trying to catch my breath, but the laugh wouldn't stop. It was coming from right outside. Slowly I peeked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but there, tied to my doorknob, was another red balloon. I started avoiding everyone after that. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't sleep. My friends stopped calling after a while. They didn't understand what I was going through. I couldn't explain it to them without sounding like a lunatic. I tried to tell a buddy about the clown, about the balloons, but he just laughed, thought I was joking. That was the last time I mentioned it to anyone. The clown was everywhere now. I'd see him standing in the shadows outside my window at night, his black eyes staring up at me. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and swear I could hear him laughing outside, that twisted, maniacal sound echoing through the empty streets. But the worst part was when I started seeing him inside. I'd be sitting on my couch trying to distract myself with TV, and out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch a glimpse of him in the reflection of the screen. He'd be standing in the corner of the room watching me, but when I turned to look, he'd be gone, like he was never there. I started locking every door, every window, but it didn't matter. He always found a way in. One night I woke up to the sound of footsteps in my apartment. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone was taking their time, savoring each step. I grabbed the bat I kept by my bed and crept down the hallway, my heart in my throat. The footsteps stopped when I reached the living room. The air was thick, suffocating, and I knew, without seeing, I knew he was there. And then I saw it. A red balloon floating in the middle of the room, bobbing gently in the air. I screamed, swung the bat, but the balloon popped with a soft hiss, leaving behind nothing but silence. That's when I realized it wasn't about the balloons. It was about him. The clown didn't just want to scare me. He wanted something else. And I was taking the bait. The clown was wearing me down, playing some twisted game I didn't understand. He wasn't just following me. He was inside my head, warping my reality. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. My dreams, my waking moments, they were all blending together into one endless nightmare. And every time I thought I was free, there he was, grinning, laughing, always watching. I quit my job. I stopped answering my phone. My friends had given up trying to reach me, and I didn't blame them. I didn't even leave the apartment anymore. I felt safer inside. At least there, I could lock the doors. But even that wasn't enough to keep him out. The balloons started appearing inside the apartment more often. I'd find them in the strangest places, tied to the bathroom mirror, floating above my bed, even inside the fridge once. Each one a silent reminder that he could get to me whenever he wanted. Then came the messages. They started out small, scribbled in red on the walls or written on scraps of paper I found around the apartment. Soon, can't hide. I'm coming. Every time I wiped them away or threw them out, new ones would appear. One night I found the word run smeared across my bathroom mirror in what looked like lipstick. But when I touched it, it wasn't lipstick. It was thick, sticky, and smelled metallic. Blood. I snapped. Something in me just broke. I couldn't live like this anymore. Couldn't stand the constant fear, the dread that gnawed at me day and night. I needed to get out. So I packed a bag with only the essentials and got into my car, determined to leave the city behind. I didn't care where I went, just as long as it was far, far away from the clown and his twisted game. As I drove, the familiar landscape of the city blurred into a distant memory. The streets gave way to empty highways, and soon I was surrounded by nothing but fields and trees. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I could outrun him. Maybe I could finally be free. But that hope didn't last long. About an hour into the drive, I glanced into the rearview mirror and my heart stopped. There, sitting in the back seat, was the clown. He was grinning wider than ever, his black eyes locked on mine through the mirror. His face was inches from mine, but I hadn't heard a sound. How had he gotten there? I swerved, nearly crashing into the guardrail, but when I turned to look, he was gone. The back seat was empty, and the road was clear. I slammed on the brakes, pulling over to the side of the road, my heart hammering in my chest. I sat there for a long time, staring into the empty back seat, waiting for him to reappear. But he didn't. Not yet. I kept driving, but no matter how far I went, the feeling that he was with me never left. I started seeing things in the trees, flashes of white, a twisted smile in the shadows. The radio, which had been playing soft static, crackled to life. A low guttural laugh filled the car, and I slammed my fist into the dashboard, trying to shut it off, but the laugh kept going, growing louder and more distorted until it was all I could hear. I yanked the wheel, pulling off the road into the gravel lot of a gas station. I needed to clear my head, to get away from the sound, but as soon as I stepped out of the car, I knew I'd made a mistake. The parking lot was empty, completely deserted. No other cars, no people, not even the faint glow of the station's lights. The whole place was dark and lifeless, like it had been abandoned for years. I backed away, turning to get back into the car, but the door wouldn't open. No matter how hard I yanked, the handle wouldn't budge. Then I saw it, another red balloon tied to the side mirror, bobbing gently in the wind. My stomach lurched. I hadn't put it there. A slow, mocking clap echoed through the air, and I spun around. There he was, standing on the edge of the lot, half hidden in the shadows. His face was illuminated by the dim glow of the moon, and that grin, it stretched impossibly wide, his eyes gleaming with malicious glee. "Time's up," he whispered, though I could hear him clearly, as if he were standing right beside me. I ran. I didn't think, didn't plan. I just bolted into the woods, my feet pounding against the dirt as branches whipped against my face. His laughter followed me, growing louder, closer. No matter how fast I ran, it felt like he was always just a step behind, always within reach. The trees closed in around me, the world spinning in a blur of shadows and moonlight. My lungs burned, my legs screamed for me to stop, but I couldn't. I knew if I stopped, he would catch me. The forest seemed endless, a maze of gnarled roots and twisting branches that stretched out like fingers, trying to trip me, to pull me down. I stumbled, nearly falling, but I caught myself and kept running, my mind racing with terror. I couldn't see him, but I could feel him. His presence was suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides. Suddenly the trees parted and I found myself standing in the middle of a clearing. My heart sank as I realized where I was. It was the carnival, the same carnival from weeks ago, the one where this nightmare had started. But this time it was different. The rides were rusted, the tents torn and flapping in the wind. The lights flickered weakly, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the empty grounds. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the faint sound of carnival music played somewhere in the distance, slow and warped, like a broken music box. I turned to leave, but the path behind me was gone. The trees had closed in, trapping me here. I was back where it had all started, and I knew there was no way out. "Welcome back," the clown's voice whispered, and I spun around to see him standing in the middle of the clearing, his grin wider than ever, his eyes gleaming with a sick, twisted pleasure. "I've been waiting for you," he said, stepping closer, his voice dripping with malice. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. He tilted his head, his grin never faltering. "You," he said simply. "I want you." I ran again. I didn't care where I went, anywhere but here. But no matter how far I ran, the carnival stretched on, an endless maze of rusted rides and decaying tents. I could hear his footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate, his laugh echoing through the air. He was playing with me, drawing out the chase, savoring my fear. Finally, I stumbled into one of the tents. It was dark inside, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of something rotting. My breathing was ragged, my body trembling with exhaustion, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let him catch me. The flap of the tent shifted, and I knew he was there. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, an old broken piece of wood, and held it out in front of me like a weapon. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice trembling. "Stay away from me!" The clown stepped into the light, his grin still impossibly wide, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "You can't run from me," he said, his voice soft, almost gentle. "You've been mine since the moment you saw me." He took another step closer and I swung the piece of wood at him, but he didn't flinch. The wood passed through him like smoke, leaving nothing but cold air in its wake. "Do you understand now?" he whispered, leaning in close, his breath cold against my skin. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to be you." His words sent a chill down my spine. Before I could react, he reached out and touched my forehead with one long gloved finger. A surge of icy pain shot through me, and the world around me began to warp, twist, and distort. The carnival lights flickered and went out, plunging everything into darkness. When I woke up, I was back in my apartment. The air was still, the room silent. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream, a horrible, twisted nightmare. But then I saw it, a red balloon floating lazily in the corner of the room, tied to the leg of my bed. I stared at it, my heart pounding, but I couldn't move. My body felt numb, my mind sluggish, like I was trapped in a fog. I tried to get up, but my limbs wouldn't respond. I was stuck, frozen in place. And then I heard it. His laugh. It started low, barely audible, but it grew louder, echoing inside my head. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The laughter swelled, filling the room, bouncing off the walls, pounding in my skull. It felt like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I forced my eyes to move, scanning the room for him, for any sign of that hideous clown. But there was nothing. Just me, and the balloon, still lazily bobbing in the corner. I tried to move again, straining every muscle in my body, but it was like I was paralyzed. My limbs felt heavy, glued to the bed, and my breathing became shallow, labored. Panic clawed at my throat as I realized I was completely helpless. And then I felt it. Cold, skeletal fingers brushing against the back of my neck. I couldn't turn my head, couldn't even flinch. The touch was icy, lingering, like it was testing me, savoring my fear. His presence was all around me now, suffocating, pressing down like a heavy weight on my chest. I could hear him breathing, slow and deliberate, just behind me. The sound of each inhale and exhale filled the room, a terrible rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. "You're mine now," the clown whispered, his voice so close it felt like it was inside my head. "There's no running, no hiding. You belong to me." The weight of his words sank into my bones. I knew what he meant. I could feel it. He wasn't just haunting me anymore. He was in me, under my skin, crawling through my mind like a parasite. Every breath I took, every thought I had, I could feel him there, laughing, pulling the strings. I was no longer alone in my own body. I don't know how long I stayed like that, trapped in that awful limbo. Minutes, hours? It felt like an eternity, like time had ceased to exist. The only thing that remained was him, and his endless, manic laughter. Eventually, I heard movement. Not his, but mine. My body was shifting, sitting up in the bed, but I wasn't the one doing it. I could feel my arms moving, my legs swinging over the side of the bed, but it wasn't me. I was watching, trapped in my own head, as my body stood up and began walking toward the mirror on the far side of the room. I wanted to scream, to fight, to regain control, but I couldn't. I was just a passenger now, helpless to stop whatever was happening. In the mirror, I saw myself, or what was left of me. My face was pale, gaunt, my eyes hollow, dark circles etched beneath them. But what terrified me most was the smile. It wasn't mine, it was his. That same sickening, twisted grin was stretched across my face, too wide, too unnatural, just like his had been. The reflection grinned back at me, its black eyes gleaming with malice. "Do you understand now?" The clown's voice echoed in my mind. "You and I, we're one. You can't escape me. Not ever." My reflection lifted a hand, fingers twitching, and I could feel it. The cold, the wrongness. I was being controlled, my every move dictated by him. Slowly, my hand moved to my face, tracing the outline of that monstrous grin, and I knew. This wasn't just some haunting. He had taken me. I was becoming him. Days passed, or was it weeks? I don't know anymore. Time doesn't make sense to me now. I don't leave the apartment. I don't need to. Everything I need is here. Him, me, we're the same now. He doesn't have to stalk me anymore because I carry him with me, inside me. His thoughts are my thoughts. His laughter, my laughter. Sometimes I catch myself smiling for no reason. I try to stop it, try to force my face back into something human, but the grin always returns like it's carved into my skin. And the balloons, they never stop coming. They're everywhere now, in every room, every corner. Bright red balloons floating silently, watching me, mocking me. At night I still hear his voice. Sometimes I hear it outside the apartment, faint and distant, like a whisper on the wind. But most of the time, it's in my head. He talks to me, laughs at me, reminds me that I can never escape. He tells me about the others, people just like me, people who thought they could outrun him, who thought they could fight. But in the end, they all belonged to him, just like I do. I've stopped trying to resist. It's easier that way. The more I fight, the stronger he gets. So I let him in. I let him take over, piece by piece. I can feel myself slipping away, losing bits of myself every day. I don't remember what my own voice sounds like anymore. It's all his now. And sometimes when I look in the mirror, I don't see myself at all. I see him, the clown, grinning back at me with those black soulless eyes, that grotesque twisted smile. And I know, deep down, that one day I'll be gone completely. There will be nothing left of me, just him. But that's what he wanted all along, wasn't it? He wasn't just stalking me, he was taking me piece by piece until there was nothing left but the laughter. I'm writing this now, but I don't know why. Maybe it's a last attempt to hold on to something. Some fragment of myself that hasn't been swallowed by the clown. Maybe it's just a warning. I don't know. But if you're reading this, if you've seen him, if you've seen the balloons, heard the laughter, then you already know what's coming. He'll find you. He always does. You can try to run, try to hide, but it won't matter. He'll catch you, eventually. And when he does, you'll start to hear the laughter too. You'll see the balloons, feel him watching you, waiting. And before you know it, you'll be just like me. You can't escape him because once you've seen the clown, he's already inside you.
Have you ever gotten a Snapchat from a girl?
Nope. Anyway, watch this.